Broadcasting live from Lothal. Good morning, Lothal. It's the Unofficial Star Wars Rebels podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Good Morning Lothal, the Unofficial Star Wars Rebels podcast. I'm Pete Salas, along with
Rolando Zamora.
How we doing, Rolly?
I'm good. Had a long week, but I'm excited to drop this next episode of the podcast. How about yourself?
I'm good, man. It's been a long week. I feel like I'm a broken record. I keep saying that it's been a long week. It's always a long week, but hey, man, we do it for the love of Star Wars. That's what we do it for, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so today's episode is episode 11. It's called Idiot's Array. But before we get to that, as usual, Rolly, what's happening around the galaxy?
Let's see what's happening this week in Star Wars.
Okay, so this week in Star Wars, we got episode 4 of Kenobi. So as promised, we are going to spend some time talking about Kenobi. So let's just jump right into some analysis regarding this latest episode. Overall, Pete, what did you think of the episode?
I enjoyed it very much. It was it was kind of not that it took a slowdown, but it was definitely a very from the beginning, I guess you could tell what the episode was going to be. And it was all going to be about, the siege and trying to rescue her. It wasn't like previous episodes where it was like they're still trying to lay some groundwork of some storyline and trying to build on something, which means the audience like, what the hell's going to happen next? Like we don't have any real idea what direction it's going. This one, on the other hand, it started with a point and it ended. You pretty much knew that was going to be the entire point of the episode. But overall, a very enjoyable episode. I'm not going to lie, I enjoyed it very much.
Yeah, I think what I'm discovering, Pete, we talked last week about, constructive arguments and such regarding the Moses Ingram situation. So I'm not going to get into that. But the reason I mentioned that is because I'm starting to get an idea, or rather, everybody should have an idea at this point that it looks like the Leia story is going to go the distance, all 6 episodes.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm not saying I had expectations of what to expect from Kenobi story-wise. I'm loving the individual scenes in the episodes. I'm loving the casting. Everything is spot on for me, except one thing. I do believe that the story is dragging a bit. Okay. And I don't know if that's because they're maybe, we talked about season 2. I don't know if that was pre-thought out and they're going to maybe drag it out a little bit. But now I'm starting to think we're not going to get that Kenobi we're not going to get that Kenobi Vader showdown. I really like Kenobi's character in that he's clearly starting to get his groove back, so to say. Right. But I just don't think ultimately that his story looks like it's meant to end in episode 6. And I'm kind of I'm a little bit bummed out about it because I feel like the first 2 episodes we got at Kenobi, they're just so incredibly awesome. So they over-delivered. They blew my expectations out of the water. But the last 2 episodes, as much as I enjoyed, again, the Vader sequences and then everything that we're seeing from Obi-Wan and Leia, I'm just kind of I feel like I'm waiting for something to happen that hasn't happened yet. Okay. I don't know how to explain that beyond just what I said. I feel everything about Kenobi has been on point with the story, somewhat feels like it's dragging its feet through the mud. But, that's just my opinion. If anybody else thinks otherwise out there, drop a comment, get the discussion going. I don't know how you feel based off of what I said, Pete.
Well,
what are your thoughts?
Okay. Well, yes, I could see how you would say that it dragged a little bit, especially in this episode. But the one thing that I can't fully co-sign on is the fact that they were already, as early as episode 4, were already planning for a season 2. I think obviously the producers and the directors and everybody in their mind, in Disney's mind for sure, yes, absolutely, let's drag this out. We know that this was going to be a huge money maker or subscription booster or whatever you want to call it. But I still don't think that at that time that they were shooting, writing, producing these things, they didn't have a commitment from Ewan McGregor to come back for a season 2 yet. So for them to already be slowing down the storyline so that they could have something to put into season 2, I don't see that as that was the mindset at that time. Is it now? Absolutely. And it might have just been a happy accident, that that episode 4 was a little bit of I don't want to call it a filler because there was a lot of action that happened, but like, you know, a filler, let's just call it that. So yes, I agree partially with what you're saying, especially about like the pacing of the episode. I enjoyed it. I thought that there was a lot of really, really cool points to it and parts to it.
Yeah.
I do agree with some of the criticism that I read, but you know, not all of it. But yeah, that's, I guess, from a production standpoint, yes, absolutely. They want to do 5-6 seasons of this, but at the time, Ewan was only up for doing one limited series. So
yeah, because I know that the original intent was it was supposed to be a film, and then they changed it to, okay, no, it's going to be a 6-episode series. And I guess me trying to use the season 2 excuse to me wanting to believe that that's why it's slow, right? As opposed to like knocking it for that. That's me actually defending it, thinking like, okay, well, we're gonna get a season 2, it's fine. But if that wasn't the case, then yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe it is a happy accident, and maybe it does cover up some things. And there was some talk about, you know, Disney needs to get away from doing the child stuff. You know, it's what they're doing with Leia is similar to what they did with what they're doing with Grogu and the Mandalorian. And then you can also say similar to what they're doing with Omega and the Bad Batch. And what's funny is I actually have no problem with that. As long as you're able to like keep the story fresh and new and it doesn't feel recycled.
No, it doesn't.
I'm all for that. It's just, I think Obi-Wan, the Kenobi series did have high expectations. Obviously, it was going to be a challenge to meet all that. And I feel like they did in the first 2 episodes. And these last 2 episodes, I just feel like the same fire hasn't been there. But who knows? Like, we got 2 more episodes left. So, you know, I'm going to be waking up at 5 a.m. regardless to watch it first thing. I'm going to prioritize it over Miss Marvel, which is my latest like interest because she's my favorite Marvel hero. But Kenobi's the priority. The podcast is the priority. Star Wars in my life is the priority.
I mean, well, how about this? How about looking at it from a different perspective? Like, if you're saying that this was intended to be a movie, let's call it a 2.5 hour long movie, then that means that they had a beginning, middle, and end, like any good movie should. So maybe this was one of those that they purposely did write as a filler to expand it into 6 episodes.
Yeah, and that's another good point. I think of Moon Knight, not to get too far out of the Star Wars universe, but I commented to a buddy of mine that I thought that show was really good, but I thought it would have been better if I had binged watched it. Yeah, I feel like each episode of that show, it wasn't strong on its own. But when I would go back and think about the episodes that connected to it, and I was like, man, you know what? I really wish I had seen this show, you know, as a binge watch, because I feel like if you could piece it all together, that it's even stronger. And maybe that's the case that we're going to get here with Kenobi, and that the last 2 episodes are really strong. I'm going to be optimistic. I'm always an optimistic Star Wars fan. I cannot stand, you know, being negative, but I do still respectively analyze each episode as we're reviewing it. And part of it is because I don't want to get my expectations up for something that's not going to deliver. And I'm not saying Kenobi's not going to deliver, but I think I've learned to mature in my fanhood to like tone it down a notch, and you know, just take it episode by episode. So nonetheless, I did want to get into some talking points about the episode. So for me, a few of the points, number 1 was the Fortress Inquisitorius. I thought that was so cool to watch because for anybody out there listening that has played Fallen Order, it was like you were reliving the game in live action. It was like almost dead on exact in the scenes that did match the game, which basically, number 1, the scene where the glass cracks and the water's about to come flushing in, that's exactly the same thing that happened in Fallen Order. Verbatim. What was really cool though that you didn't get in Fallen Order was the Jedi tomb. Where they showed all those old fallen Jedi just kind of being displayed. It was intense, man.
It was.
I couldn't think of a better word to describe that. Like, first I was like, this is awesome, and then like quickly I'm like, this is terrible.
No, and I was waiting for this part to come up because, like, you know me, Sith sympathizer, excuse me, but that was just a little too much. It was just a little tad bit too much.
And I like how they like topped it off with the very last one they show. It's a youngling.
Yes,
I was like, oh my goodness, that's terrible.
That's insane. So that's. I saw it also phrased as a trophy room. So what do you think? It's more of a tomb or a trophy room? I mean,
I think it's like both almost. For me, I'm kind of I'm leaning on the side that they're preserving them to begin the cloning process, which we get a taste of at the end of Bad Batch.
That makes sense.
Which is immediately post Order 66, and then we did get into it at the end of Mandalorian season 2, which ultimately leads to the sequel trilogy where they show Snoke being cloned. I think that that's the beginning of this, and I'm really looking forward to Bad Batch season 2 because I hope to get into the cloning. I'm believing that Omega is the first Force sensitive clone, so I'm hoping that all this kind of ties together into that. But going back, not to get too off topic on the tomb, I loved when they showed the very first Jedi, and it was the old Jedi Master from Clone Wars, Terrace Anube. For anybody who didn't recognize him, he came out in a small arc with Ahsoka Tano, where she lost her saber somehow, and she basically asked him for help to locate it. And he was like this old Jedi walking around with the cane, like kind of like Yoda, like not showing off his skill, acting real. Yeah,
he reminded me of like a Master Splinter almost, kind of that.
Yeah, that's the best way to put it. So that was a cool sequence. I think he had a white saber too, which was, I'm an Ahsoka Tano fanatic, so for me the white saber is the best saber. But that was a cool tie into the Clone Wars because there's a lot of Jedi out there. You don't know the fate of them. Right. We got the fate of Quinlan Voss in the previous episode, who's alive, and in this one, Terrace Anube is actually dead or being preserved for future use. And then the other cool thing about that too, Pete, is I actually tied it into the Rebels episode where they were using Luminara's corpse.
Yes, I thought of that too. I thought of that.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So there's a lot of tie-in between Clone Wars, Rebels. There's a lot to it. So anybody who's just listening to this portion of the podcast to stay current, if you're not caught up on the animated series, there's another reason.
Yep, absolutely. So I did have to look him up. Like I know I recognized it, but I didn't remember him by name. So I had to go look him up, and that's like, oh, that was what it was. He was the one that was helping Ahsoka at that time.
Yeah, I was so tempted to pause instantly there, and I was like, no, that's who it is. Just look it up after the episode. But I didn't know. I didn't remember his name either. That's a little bit too deep into it for me. But now that we're talking about it, it's probably going to stick. Right. But I did recognize him by the look the same way you did. Those were my points. Did you have any ones?
Well, other than one of my criticisms that I did think was I felt like we barely saw Obi-Wan in this one. Like he was not on camera very, very much, which also leads to, I guess, my new theory, which is this would have been like the siege of the fortress would have been like a 20-minute part of a movie, but they had to double it and expand it and make it that much more. So there was more. I feel like we got a lot of like Leia being interrogated, and I'm forgetting the character's name, but the one that's helping Obi-Wan, like guiding him through the place more so than we actually saw Obi-Wan on camera. So I guess that would be my only criticism. I did not have a problem with the great escape at the end of walking her out under the big trench coat. Like, was it a little silly? Maybe, but like it's also it's a TV show. I mean, come on. So that didn't bother me as much as it had angered the internet trolls.
No, all those little details where people are complaining about, the chase scene from whatever the first or second episode was ridiculous, and then those little things where like, okay, like I'm removing reality. I'm in fantasy world whenever I'm seeing this stuff. So legitimately the only thing I ever care about is the story. And that's why that's why I said what I said at the beginning of the segment. All those details in between, like, in my opinion, I understand people think differently, but I feel like people dwell too much into that. And it's just like, I can't enjoy this show or movie because this is totally distracting. Has that happened to me before? Yeah, it's happened to me before. But when I love the story or the fandom, the movie so much, like none of that matters. I mean, best example is the animation in Rebels. Is it better than Clone Wars? Absolutely not. It fails in comparison. But I love Rebels more than Clone Wars because I love the story. So that always trumps everything for me. So
that makes sense.
Do you have any expectations for the 5th episode?
Well, yes, I do have expectations, but like I think we're kind of both a little gun shy on like trying to say what it is, because we have not really been right on a lot of what we're saying. But that's also kind of good, because why the hell would you want to go into it just knowing what's going to happen next? That's no fun either. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I guess the only expectation I have is, as long as Din Djarin doesn't show up, I'm sure I'll be happy. I love the Mandalorian, but let's keep the Mandalorian in his own universe for now. Yeah,
exactly.
So, anyways, moving on from Kenobi, we got some birthdays, some big ones this week to talk about. For starters, Liam Neeson. Everybody knows him as Qui-Gon Jinn. He is 70 years old as of June 7th.
Is he really? Oh my God.
I know, right? When I looked that up, I was like, are you kidding me? I hope I look like that when I'm 70 years old. But he is a Master Jedi, so
yes,
maybe that has something to do with it.
They age differently.
Yeah. Another birthday, another big one. Natalie Portman is 41 years old. Everybody knows her, of course, as Padme and Queen Amidala.
Yes.
Birthday is June 8th. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that was when the prequel trilogy was going on. That's when I was like, recognizing people a lot more. And she was one of them. It's like, and she's in Star Wars, so top notch.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I knew that she was around, my age, but I didn't know that she was actually a year older than me. That's interesting. I never really looked her up. Happy birthday to her.
Yes, happy birthday. And Bill Burr, he played Miggs Mayfeld in
Hilarious.
The Mandalorian.
Have you ever seen any of his stand-up? Are you a fan of his?
I've seen just clips like on YouTube and shit. So I haven't sat down and watched his stuff, but like from the small amount that I've seen, it's kind of cool how they casted him, and it's like somewhat the same person.
Yeah, no, it is. He's like the perfect, like, cranky kind of a comedian. Like, he just like he complains about life and his family and whatever. He also actually he voices a TV show that on Netflix called F is for Family. And he's the lead on that one, and that's a really funny show too. So
I got to check that one out.
I'm a big fan of his.
Yeah, he's 54 years old as of June 10th. So happy birthday, Bill Burr. And last but not least, I saved him for last.
There he is.
Dave Filoni. He is 48 years old. And for anybody not familiar with Dave Filoni, he is the Lucasfilm executive producer, creative director, or as I like to call him, the second coming of George Lucas.
Yes. He's definitely, the man is a saint. That's why I call him Saint Filoni. He was
born on June 7th. I saved him last too because I wanted to talk about him a little bit. There's a story out there that he has told, but I want to reiterate it to our listeners for who haven't heard it. Dave Filoni was actually hired by George Lucas directly. This was before Disney bought Star Wars. So Dave Filoni worked hand in hand on the Clone Wars. He co-created Ahsoka Tano with George Lucas. It's a really cool story that he tells because he used to actually work on the Avatar cartoon for Nickelodeon.
Okay.
So I don't know how he went about applying for a position in Star Wars, but basically what happened was, I guess whoever George Lucas' secretary called him and said, hey, you have an interview with George such and such day. And he didn't believe her. He said, oh, who put you up to this? Was it the guys in such and such department? And she was like, of course she was serious. So she didn't know what was going on. And he kept repeating it like over and over and over again.
That's crazy.
I remember him saying he went into the interview room with him, like basically telling himself, hey, no matter what happens, I'm going to have the one up on all my friends now.
Oh, yeah, of course.
I think he asked him, he wanted to know something specific that he always thought, how like it wasn't not like a fan theory, but like we have our suspicions of like, oh, such and such person made the character for this reason. So he had something like that he kind of got confirmation on, and he was like, yeah, now I know because George Lucas told me himself.
That's crazy, man.
Oh, a story. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I've never heard that story before. I didn't know that he was hired directly by George.
I think he told that story in they did like a table talk with the directors of the first season of The Mandalorian. I think that's where he told it in there. It was like Behind the Magic. It's a special on Disney Plus. There's a lot of cool stories that he actually tells on that. Okay. So if anybody hasn't seen that, highly recommend that you guys check it out. Big fan of his because he has his footprint heavily in the animation. Well, not in the animation, but like everything to do with the animated series, in Star Wars. So he ranks probably We talked about Kanan and Ahsoka 1A and 1B. I guess George Lucas and Dave Filoni are my 1A and 1B.
Right. Wow, no, man, I had no idea that he went back that far to the pre Disney purchase era.
Yeah, definitely. You know what? A mutual friend of ours asked me yesterday. He's like, "Is there anybody you haven't met at a con that you want to meet?" And I'm kind of already on that boat where I'm like, a lot of times I care more about the autograph. It has to be a special person for me to like. I have to meet this person because I have to ask them something. I just want to hang out with them for 5 seconds.
Yeah.
I don't remember who I told him. Oh, the new girl from Miss Marvel. I was like, instantly, that's who I want to meet. But Dave Filoni, I would kill to be able to like talk to Dave Filoni for like 5 minutes.
Right.
Or just hang out with the dude. Like, I mean, I think that would be the coolest thing ever.
That would be cool. Maybe just to have a little bit of the Filoni magic kind of dust off on you, even if by through osmosis and shaking his hand or something like that.
Yeah, that would be like, I would take a picture of that, put it everywhere, be like I basically met the closest thing I'll ever meet to George Lucas.
It's funny that you didn't say George Lucas, unless you've met him. Have you met him?
No, but I don't think at this point, I don't think that that's ever going to happen.
Right. It's just curious.
But that would be cool too. I think I kind of try to keep it in perspective though. I'm like, there is a chance I can meet Dave Filoni. I don't think there's a chance I'll ever be able to meet George Lucas, but that's okay. So anyways, that kind of closes the book on our This Week in Star Wars segment. So actually wanted to try something new. I asked Pete, choose one option or the other option. He told me to pick. So I flipped a coin, of course, because I couldn't decide. And this new segment that we're going to do is we're going to rank Star Wars movies. And we're going to start, kind of easy. It's kind of too argumentative here. And we're going to rank the original trilogy as far as how our favorites are regarding that. So why don't you start, Pete?
Okay, so if I had to rank, and this is an unpopular opinion, probably, but I'm going to go with Return of the Jedi first, and we might have already talked about that.
As your number one?
As my number one.
Okay.
As my number one. I guess maybe I should have done it backwards, but
it's all good.
Yeah, no. My number one is Return of the Jedi because that was the one that was the one that came out when I was born. That was my Star Wars. That was what I knew of to be Star Wars. It was that's exactly why when I went back and finally watched them 4, 5, 6, it threw me off when I would see Luke Skywalker with a blue lightsaber, because to me that wasn't his color. His color was green, but that's just because I ended up watching the third one first. But so my order is just backwards. It's Return of the Jedi, Empire Strikes Back, and then A New Hope. And it's only because I know that A New Hope is like the OG. It's like, they're all great in their own way, but that one was the slowest one to me. That was the most least. And you have to also remember my age group at that time. I was under 10 when I was watching these films. So to me, it was all about the action. It was all about the Ewoks, the speeder bikes, the green lightsaber, which I also had as a child. So it's Return of the Jedi, Empire, which just has the perfect storyline with the perfect twist ending of all time, and then A New Hope would be, so I guess technically 3, 2, 1 backwards.
Yeah, so it's funny that you say putting it in perspective of your age, because if I left it in that order, or rather relative to my age, I would have the exact same order: Return of the Jedi, Empire Strikes Back, and A New Hope. And I think all the points you said about why at that time I thought Return of the Jedi was the best one, you said it. I don't think I've ever sat down and thought about it. Like, why did you like it back then, aside from maybe thinking it's just a more fun film? But as I got older and I started watching Empire more, it just kind of shifted. And I think my order probably would be Return of the Jedi third, A New Hope second, and Empire Strikes Back first. And it's funny because Empire, that's actually the first Star Wars film I saw, so I know a part of that does tie into why I favor it. But it's my favorite for all the most obvious reasons. It's probably my favorite film, period, of all films I've ever seen. So
really,
yes.
Okay.
So I know that's a very strong statement, but hey, I'm here doing a Star Wars podcast, so I'm not gonna try to act like I'm just saying that.
Right.
Now that movie basically inspired all my Star Wars fandom. So That's my order. And as far as A New Hope, ranking it over Return of the Jedi, I think it just, for me, it's like some of the scenes, they're a bit more iconic. Like I go back to them, I think about them. The music for me is iconic too. I think the score in Empire Strikes Back and A New Hope, it's just a little tad bit better than Return of the Jedi. And I factor that into that also. So
here's a question that I just thought of. Neither one of us were alive when the first run of the movies even came out. So we did not have that experience of watching them in the order that they came out in the theater. Do you think that your list would be different had you watched it, like if we were, 10 years older and we were able to have watched it at the time?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know if A New Hope would ultimately beat Empire, but I definitely think A New Hope would have significantly higher ranking for me because that would have been the first Star Wars movie that I saw in the theater.
Right.
And I'm glad you asked that because it reminds me of the prequel trilogy. Whenever I watch Phantom Menace, which is not often, but whenever I do watch it, I always think it's enjoyable nonetheless because it's the first Star Wars movie that I saw in the theater. It always takes me back to that mindset of going to the theater and enjoying Star Wars for the first time, brand new, and it was the Phantom Menace. So I would say, yeah, A New Hope would probably maybe be my favorite if that was the case.
Okay. I remember talking to a friend of mine who's a little bit older. Well, I mean, I guess like 10 years older than me. This was years ago. Like I was like 17 so he must have been late 20s, maybe early 30s. I have no idea how old this man is. But anyway, we were talking Star Wars back then. And I distinctly remember him saying that he was waiting in line to go watch A New Hope. And the theater doors opened, like someone was, I guess, I don't exactly know where he was watching it, but the way that he was waiting in line, he was waiting right by an exit point. And someone in the theater who was already watching the current showing walked out and swung the doors open and go bathroom, go buy popcorn, whatever it was. And he looked in and he peeked in and he saw, and he says, my very, very first memory of anything Star Wars was seeing just this dome with a red light with blue highlights on it. And I had absolutely no idea because it was just beeping. And it must have been less than the 3 seconds that it took for the door to open and for the door to close and for him to see. But for him to say that was his first memory. I mean, I know it's his first memory, it's not mine, but like still it's like I felt it. I felt what he felt, which was like, what the hell is going on in this movie? And I've only seen 3 seconds of it. I cannot wait to see the rest of it. You know what I mean? It's kind of that feeling. And I'm kind of envious that I never got to experience that particular, you only get to see it once, the first time, one time, you know what I mean? It's only your first time once, I guess. And mine was on VHS and his was in a movie theater and many people's were, and I just kind of envious of that. But that's
I think that's why I actually do think very highly of the Phantom Menace whenever I watch it, because it doesn't really make me envious that I didn't get to see those movies in the theaters. It just makes the Phantom Menace a bit more special for me. And I think that's really cool because the Phantom Menace doesn't rank very high in my favorite Star Wars overall list, but it's special to me for that reason. So I like to think of like 15 years from now, what are people like kids that saw The Force Awakens as their first Star Wars movie in theater? What are they going to say? Because you know what? The Force Awakens is a really good film compared to The Phantom Menace. So if I'm ranking The Phantom Menace high in my book because that was my first experience, like I'd kill to have been a kid watching The Force Awakens as my first Star Wars movie. I think it is like such an awesome film to be like your first one. Right. So I'm curious to see what those people say because it took me a while to figure out why so many people were high on Revenge of the Sith now that we're in the social media age. And sure enough, it's because they're kids that saw Revenge of the Sith in theaters, and it ranks incredibly high, like top 3 on a lot of people's list, but it's that reason. So Star Wars is really made for kids. George Lucas has said it. It's funny, they're on one of Freddie Prince's podcasts. I think this was an older podcast. I know he does like a wrestling one now, but he kind of like talked to people and he criticized toxic fans and like, hey, Star Wars is kids. And when I saw that segment, I was like, Kanan's telling me Star Wars is for kids. It's for kids. So I'm gonna be a kid every single time I'm watching this stuff.
Right. That's a you know what, Rolly, that is a great mindset to be in. I think we could all use a reminder that this was intended for kids, and we just happen to have co-opted it as adults. And I know that it was part of our childhood, and it's something that like we hold dear. It's our little binky blanket that we had since we were little kids, for most of us. But keep in mind that it was intended for a young audience, I guess, and we could all use a reminder of that.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, well, let's get to what we were initially here for, which is to talk Star Wars Rebels. So why don't you hit us with this week's episode synopsis?
Okay, so in this week's episode, Idiot's Array, the episode centers around the crew of the Ghost working for Lando Calrissian. After Zeb loses a sabacc bet to the smuggler and gambler, Calrissian uses the crew to his own ends in order to begin a mining operation on Lothal, while at the same time evading a crime lord called Asmorgan.
Okay, so it was I'm going to say it was a fun episode. It didn't really do much.
That's exactly what I was going to call it. It was probably the most fun filler episode I've seen.
It was definitely another filler episode, but this was a very, very fun filler. And I don't know how much of it had to do with the fact that there was a legend that, came back that had a cameo or was full-fledged part of this episode. How much of it was actually not just Lando, the character, but Mr. Billy D. Williams actually voicing him? It made it more than just a filler for you.
Significantly. I think it's two things. Number one is in this episode, man, the Lando character couldn't have been more Lando. Right. I feel like that was the most Lando you've ever seen that character in this filler episode.
Right.
That's why it was so fun. And then I tell myself when I'm watching these, I'm like, man, they did it. I always like tell myself, oh, they did a really good job of matching this person's voice. And then I kind of just, I pause it and check. I let the episode run and I tell myself that because, sometimes they do a really good job. Like I think of James Arnold Taylor voicing Obi-Wan. Sounds exactly like him. And it's not Ewan McGregor in the Clone Wars. So sure enough, I get to the end, pause, Billy D. Williams. I was like, yes. It was so, it just added so much more to it because I was already like totally sold on the Lando character. But yeah, it was a huge part of it. And I've never been high on the Lando character. No? And I think, I think as you get older, I think you start appreciating those characters more. And this guy is like the smoothest of the smoothest talkers in the Star Wars universe. And yeah. But anyways, as we mentioned in the the guests for this week's episode, in the previous episode, it's called Idiot's Array. And I said, it's a winning hand to sabacc. And sure enough, this episode starts off with Zeb playing sabacc against Lando in the local cantina there in Lothal. Mm-hmm. So they show that, and Chopper's already kind of like, he's upset because he knows Zeb is losing. He's bumping his head against the table. Like, what are you doing? Like, you're out of your element. Kanan is sitting at the bar and he's asking the bartender, if there's any work available. And the bartender is like, no, but your buddy over there, the guy that he's playing against, speaking of Lando, he's looking to hire a ship and crew. So everybody familiar with the Lando character knows he's kind of the same scummy type person as Han Solo. Right. in a cool, good way, right? Not totally like full-blown criminal. So they pan back to the sabacc game, and Zeb, he has a hand of sabacc, and he's telling Chopper, man, I can't lose. And Kanan looks at his hand and he's like, oh yeah, he's like, go all in, basically. And Lando tells him, well, you don't have enough cash. And Zeb goes, well, that's okay, I got a droid. So he bets Chopper, even though Chopper belongs to Hera, for anybody that doesn't know that. So Zeb shows his hand. It's a natural sabacc, which is the best way I can explain it is a natural sabacc is like having a straight flush in poker. Nobody's going to beat a straight flush except with one hand, and the odds of them having that hand is very low. Right. Okay, well, the one hand that does beat the natural sabacc, which is a score of 23, is the Idiot's Array. And the Idiot's Array is like your royal flush. So sure enough, he puts down the hand and he's like, that's it, I won. And of course, like in every iconic poker fashion, Lando's like, not so fast.
Not so fast.
Yeah. Places his hand down, and it's the Idiot's Array. Mm-hmm. So he proceeds to take ownership of Chopper and take all the credits away from them, and they're just like, stupefied as to what happened. And that's like the first like 30 seconds of the episode, which to me was like the coolest part. Anytime there's poker involved, like in any movie or show, it's like I'm watching, like the stakes just get raised literally on the spot.
I also liked a lot that they showed that the ghost crew, from time to time, the rations get pretty thin, like things like they don't always have a source of steady income, and like that things are going to get tight, and like they will be out looking for more work. I mean, I think not that it added to the episode, but it was a kind of a cool peek behind, like, they really are just, chugging along throughout outer
living
space.
Paycheck to paycheck.
Exactly.
Rebels does a hell of a job, like, with the story. Like there really isn't a lot that gets through the cracks. So that's a good point. Just kind of pointing that out, like, hey, we're doing what we can, and we're not taking anything for ourselves. Everything that we're putting into our missions to help people is for the people and not for us. So really awesome point. So after that scene, the team basically heads back to the ghost, and they know they're going to hear it from Hera. Like, they know they're in trouble. Even Kanan's like the Jedi, and it was just like, go all in. Used no Jedi like training in that scenario. Which I loved, because it's painted a picture of Kanan, how he still has a lot to learn. So they're walking back with Lando, because Lando, basically to get themselves out of there, Kanan already struck a deal with Lando to for him to hire them so that they can get some credits, get some fuel. So Kanan introduces Lando to the crew, and he says that Lando needs help moving some cargo past an Imperial blockade, which we don't know what it is yet. And Lando tells them they're going to get paid well, and that once the mission's completed, he'll return Chopper to them. And then that's when Hera first finds out that they bet Chopper in a game of sabacc, and she just proceeds to get upset at Zeb and Kanan for doing that, because, like I said, it's Hera's droid. Chopper belongs to Hera.
Right.
Of course, they're in the ship, they're taking off, and they show a scene in the cockpit where Hera, Kanan, and Chopper and Lando are talking, and Kanan proceeds to tell Chopper that he needs to go fix the ghost signature modulator, which is going to allow them to mask the ship to get past the Imperial blockade. So of course Chopper immediately is like, well, I don't work for you anymore. Like, so you're going to have to ask the big guy to tell him to do it for me. So of course, like, Lando smooth talks everybody, including the droids, which you saw with his droid in the Solo movie, which I loved. I forget the name of her droid. So he proceeds to kind of like nicely ask Chopper, hey, would you help these kind fellows like fix the ship so that I can, complete my task? So they show Chopper. No, Chopper's like, you know what? I'll just give him a tour instead. Well, instead of doing that, right? So he proceeds to take Lando through the ship, and they show Zeb and Ezra hanging out at chess table, lounge, whatever. And Zeb tells Ezra, he's like, man, I don't like that guy. And I'm like almost certain that he cheated, which I wrote down is a callback to Solo, where he does cheat against Han Solo.
Yes.
So it's a strong possibility that he cheated against Zeb. So Ezra's like, oh, come on, man, you're just being a sort of loser. He actually seems pretty nice. Well, the second he says that, Lando runs into Sabine, and he proceeds to start smooth talking her about her paintings, like complimenting them. And right away, it just triggers Ezra, and he immediately changes his mind. He's like, you know what? I don't like him either.
Yeah.
So the ghost takes off. Apparently, they have to pick up the cargo first from Az Morgan, who we haven't met at this point, but apparently Lando struck a deal with Az Morgan to trade him some, like, what was it called? A puffer pig. So that's the actual mining equipment that Lando was referring to that he needed help picking up. So they meet Az Morgan, and just a real scummy guy, like almost like a Jabba the Hutt type character.
Yes. Not
the same species, but I think that's kind of what they went for in creating
like
that character.
Bat or something like that. That's kind of what he looked like. And a side note, he was voiced by the incredibly legendary James Hong. I just wanted to make sure that I pointed that out, because that man, I think that he holds the like Guinness World Record for the amount of IMDb entries, which means he's done like over 800 films or something like that. It's insane. I might have the number wrong, but it's definitely insane. And you know him from just about everything. One of my favorite memories of him is he played Cassandra's dad in the Wayne's World movies, which
that's true.
He was great in this as Morgan.
Yeah, I didn't recognize the voice until I paused later in the credits to see Lando, and I was like, well, who else is here? And then I saw him, and I was like, oh, no way, that's awesome. Yeah, so anyways, Lando, basically the deal that he has with as Morgan is that he's going to trade Hera for the pig, which just like makes it even worse because they already lost Chopper, and now he's trading Hera. So he's just, I think Sabine even tells Kanan, like, man, you just had a rough day. Like, you've lost both Hera and Kanan, or both Hera and Chopper.
Right.
So of course Hera and Kanan, they're upset, but obviously they don't have any choice but to go along with the plan. So what I thought was really cool in that scene was as Morgan comments on Hera's attire being a joke. And I wrote that down. That's a callback to basically every Twi'lek you see in the movies. Every Twi'lek you see in the movies, there's some type of entertainer or like there's some type of servant. And they're like dressed really well because clearly they're showing you like that's the species that like the men of the Star Wars universe are attracted to, I guess. Right. And when you see Hera show up in Rebels, she doesn't look like that at all. In my opinion, she's dressed like a badass Rebels like starfighter with the goggles and the gear. I think she's super cool. So to point that out, I thought it just painted Hera like in an even cooler picture than, you know, these like, other typical Twi'lek you see. Yeah. Right.
Like that may be what my species is known as, but not me. Kind of.
Exactly. And Hera's, it's hard for me to say like, I'm going to always say like, that's why such and such person from Rebels is one of my favorite characters. And they all have their reasons. I just love the Ghost crew so much. So she's definitely really high on my list. So I look forward to seeing more of her in the Ahsoka show. So moving on with the episode, Lando gets the pig, the puffer pig. I think that's what it's called. I don't remember. Pig. Yeah, puffer pig from As Morgan, and he basically proceeds to drop it off in the hangar. And right away, Ezra and Zeb, like a couple of kids, they're like, "Well, what is that?" Like when the package shows up to the door and it's doesn't have your name on it, but you have to know what it is. So they're looking at it, and Lando tells them, "Hey, keep an eye on that. Don't let it get out. Don't scare it." So sure enough, first thing they do,
they let it out.
They let it out. So I think Lando is explaining to Hera what the pig does. And in the process, the pig runs by them and he's like, catch the pig, but don't scare her. And of course, Zeb being naturally scary, he scares the pig, and the pig just like expands instantly. And it basically blocks the hallway between the cockpit and the rest of the Ghost. Well, unfortunately, it's Kanan and Ezra and Zeb that are on the cockpit side, and Hera, Sabine, and Lando are on the other side, and Hera's the pilot. So it's not good. You need Hera piloting the Ghost all the time. So in that process, it's time for them to go past the blockade, the Imperial blockade. So Chopper hasn't fixed the modulator. So Kanan's like, again, hey, can you fix it? Otherwise, we're going to be screwed here.
Right.
So as that's going on, he quickly fixes it. And then, of course, there's some type of goofy incident that happens. And this time it is Ezra proceeds to hear Lando smooth talking Sabine yet again on the other side of the pig. And he proceeds to try to climb over the pig to get to them so that he can kind of like get in between and make him knock it off. Well, because he's trying to squeeze between the pig, the pig gets more scared and it knocks Zeb back like all the way to the cockpit controls, and he crashes into the controls. And of course, he proceeds to accidentally unmask the Ghost at the time that they're already passing the Imperial blockade.
Right.
So the Imperials right away, they're like, oh, it's not such and such ship, it's the Ghost. These are the rebels we've been looking for. So they send the TIE fighters after them to try to capture them. So again, unfortunately, Kanan's piloting the Ghost and not Hera. So Kanan's trying to navigate his way out of there. Hera's trying to give him advice from, the other side of the Ghost. Fortunately, they're able to make it out of there, and they go to Lando's plot of land that he has on Lothal, where he's going to run this independent mining business. And coincidentally, they mentioned that he bought it off of Vizago. Vizago is actually the arms dealer from like the very first or second episode that the Ghost was buying selling the Imperial guns to. They land, and Lando further proceeds to explain to Hera like, okay, why is it a puffer pig that you were trading? And he tells her, it's because they have a nose for precious minerals and they can do the job of a dozen mining scanners. So the Empire, and then she's like, oh, that makes sense. You know, the Empire doesn't want private miners mining Lothal, so I can see why you're doing this. Right. He's a smuggler at heart. As they're walking into Lando's encampment, as Morgan intercepts them, and he basically says, I want my pig back and I want the ghost crew as compensation. And you're done, Lando. Like, I'm going to end you right here. That proceeds to lead into the ghost crew getting into a shootout with As Morgan and his goons. And this is probably one of the coolest scenes from the episode, because remember, we're coming off the Path of the Jedi episode previously. So Ezra's about to bust out his new lightsaber, right? And Kanan's like, whoa, okay, like, you can't just use your lightsaber in this day and age. Like, we're trying to hide. Ezra's like, yeah, that's not what I'm going to do. And he starts shooting the lightsaber. Like we mentioned, it's like a nail gun. Well, it does actually shoot. So that's why it looks like that. So it was super funny because Kanan's like, wow, he's like, mine doesn't do that. He's like, kid, you continue to impress me. And what's funny is as soon as he said that, Ezra's already like getting cocky, right? You hear Sabine in the distance go, nice shot, Lando. And Ezra immediately is just like, yeah, I mean, but it's not as impressive as Lando, apparently. Yeah. So that part was really funny.
I liked it that mine doesn't do that is kind of a callback from the first time that they see one of the Inquisitors' lightsabers that's spinning, and then they were all clowning him like, does yours do that? So he's definitely got lightsaber envy again.
Yeah, that's true. I forgot about that. Good point. So amid the battle, they show kind of Chopper doing his own thing. Chopper's always up to no good, and whether it's for better or for worse, you're just wondering what he's doing. So sure enough, they show him stealing and loading a fuel container onto the Ghost. And these fuel containers were kind of already out there. They're Orlando's property. Mm-hmm. So he's loading it onto the Ghost. Nobody's paying attention to him. Well, the crew finally, they win the fight with As Morgan, and they tell him, well, we're going to let you live. Just get out of here. So Lando's like, not a good idea, but thanks for helping me. But hey, guys, I unfortunately don't have the credits to pay you like I promised. Of course, he's a smuggler. He's just he's scummy. The crew's like, well, we got ourselves into this mess, or, Kanan and Zeb to be more specific. So they're just lucky to have gotten out of it. And as they're walking back onto the Ghost, you see Hera talking to Kanan, and he tells him, you know what? You need to learn to appreciate Chopper more. And the reason, and when he says that, Ezra's like walking with Sabine, like right next to them. And he's like, well, I always appreciated you, Sabine. And Sabine's like, I know, Ezra, I know. He's always like trying to find his entry. It's super funny. I dig it. And I hope that there's like more of that and more progress in the Ahsoka show. Again, just going back to the celebration episode we did. So anyways, Hera tells Kanan that he needs to learn to appreciate Chopper more for a reason, because as they get on the ship, I guess she noticed what he was doing. Well, Chopper actually got fuel for the Ghost, which was what they needed. They needed fuel and food, and Chopper managed to just steal some from Lando. So in that whole process where he was given to Lando for no reason, or in losing him to Sabak, he actually still helped the Ghost. So
because that's still his family after all.
Yes, as demented or as mischievous as he is, he's always still pulling his weight. So the episode ends. They showed Lando talking to the pig. I don't know why. I guess he understands it. And he's telling the pig, well, of course I knew they stole the fuel. That's why I didn't pay them. A gambler never shows his cards. And that was the end of the episode.
Great way to end it. I loved it. Like I said, yes, filler episode. Doesn't matter, because we got the great Billy D. Williams reprising his role as Lando, and just made it an absolutely fun 22 minutes, without a doubt.
Yeah, definitely. I was pleasantly surprised. I saw the thing. I was like, I remember this episode. It's filler, but I think since we're analyzing Star Wars even deeper, it just made this episode more fun. As soon as I realized, this is a Lando episode. Learn to appreciate him, and yeah, sure enough, he delivers.
Absolutely. So that brings us to the end of the recap for this week's episode. Any parting thoughts, Rolly, before we let these fine people go?
Again, I'll just reiterate. I know Pete always drops the like, share, and subscribe stuff, but I want to show I want to give appreciation to Pete like I always do, because Pete does a hell of a job each week. Editing, adding to the show, delivering on YouTube. He purposely does not show me the finished product so that it's a surprise for me, and I am always like super happy to see that. I never when we first started the podcast, I wanted to ask him like, well, should I watch it so I can tell you like what pictures to add? No, he's just on point. Like he knows my taste. I think there was only ever one incident where you almost put the wrong thing.
Yes.
And you just so happened to ask me
that was
about
so
it. And
weird.
I was like, no, it's supposed to actually be a picture. Yeah, exactly. Right.
It was so weird because just out of nowhere, I'm like, hey, I'm almost done. And I snapped a picture of the computer and you're like, well, wait a minute. Whoa. you can't show that yet. That's a spoiler. And I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, sorry.
And that was the only incident. Like everything else I've never seen until he drops it. And I'm always just blown away by what he's done. So that's going to be my ending like thought for this episode. Just want to show you some appreciation, man. I really appreciate you. Yeah, when you came to me and told me the first time, do you want to do a Star Wars podcast? I was already thinking like, well, I don't know how to do all this. I don't know how to do all this and such. And you were like, don't worry about it. I just want you to talk Star Wars. And like, I feel like you do a lot of the work. So appreciate you helping me like talk Star Wars and join in on the online community.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate you appreciating me. So like I said, that brings us to the end of this episode of Good Morning Lothal. But before I go, like he said earlier, I want to remind you all to please like, share, subscribe, and rate. Drop us a comment, drop us any type of feedback. It's greatly appreciated. We do read them. We might not be right on point of replying in that moment, but we will get back to it. That's a note for you, Rolly. Go back and see who's written to us that we haven't replied to. Just once again, if you are an old school podcast listener, traditional, let's call it, you can find us on anywhere that you find your podcast. Just search Good Morning Lothal. So if there's nothing else, then I want to remind you guys to join us again next week for episode 12 now of Star Wars Rebels. It's called Vision of Hope. So that could mean anything. I'm not even going to ask you what you think that means.
Okay.
It's a vision of hope. But whenever there's the word hope, there's some sort of a connection to what the original trilogy or how I feel.
Yeah, that's kind of how I look at it too.
If there's nothing else, then I just want to say thank you again for joining us. I'm Pete Salas, along with
Rolando Zamora,
saying, may the Force be with you always. Goodbye from Lothal.